Fraser Whineray is the CEO of Mighty River Power. He was announced as the new CEO in May 2014 and formally took up the role on 1 September 2014, so he has been there long enough to now officially be to blame for everything. He was previously GM operations at the company, responsible for optimising the performance of the organisation's domestic generation, electricity portfolio and industrial sales activities. He joined Mighty River in 2008 from Rank Group-owned Carter Holt Harvey, where he was Director Operational Improvement, and prior to that he had a number of senior roles in the dairy industry and with Credit Suisse First Boston in New Zealand and Australia. Fraser Whineray.
Thanks very much, Phil, and thanks to Penny and the Sustainable Business Council for the invitation to speak today, and great to be alongside such a auspicious company. Phil summarised where I'm at. Not quite through the first year, so I've still got the ability to blame the predecessor for a few things, but anyway, kia ora tātou. In the 5 minutes I've got, I just want to cover off three things, a bit like Chris, three things. Firstly, the context of New Zealand's electricity versus the rest of the world, since very few of you own houses overseas and plug into that and understand what that experience is like. So I'll just give a bit of a context of how that features and how we've got there. Mighty River Power in the context of New Zealand electricity, so you can see where I'm coming from in the privileged position of leading this company. And also New Zealand's, what I see is, thirdly, New Zealand's largest green growth opportunity right now, which is in transport electrification. So in terms of mainstreaming sustainability, I'd have to sort of go a slightly different tack and say that renewable electricity mainstreamed with sustainability a long, long time ago. And you have to do that because you have to be in the game longer than regional plans, longer than resource consents, and actually almost forever. And our deep relationships with Māoridom actually really help us do that, because mana whenua have to have a strategy to stay, not go. And through the Waikato Hydro Scheme, which we run, and also through the geothermal joint ventures, which we have, legitimate joint ventures with commercial partners, which are going to last, some of them more than 80 years, so we're all dead by then. You actually really have to set up for the ultra long term. And the way that you see Māoridom feel the burden of the decisions that will, of 50 years of hindsight, they think of their mokopuna and whether they will be, how they'll be judged by them, which is a brutal test to have 50 years of hindsight on you. But that's how they think about it. You can see the strain on their shoulders, and so we naturally work alongside them, because when you're a custodian of natural resources, you really actually have to be there for the long game. That is your business. It is harnessing sustainable energy, and if you don't, you're out of business. So it's not a token thing on the side that you quickly get comms to whip up with a few glossy photos in the back of the annual report. This is the core business of renewable energy. So, in the rest of the world, how do we compare? We're the third best renewability, and I think the data packet came out yesterday from MB. We're at about 80% renewable electricity, not to be confused with energy. We're 40% renewable energy, and they're used interchangeably, but it's important we understand the difference. And actually in that is the prize, which I'm going to talk about shortly. We're the fourth best on reliability, and we're about the 10th best on pricing. Now, third best on renewability, I just want to say Norway's ahead of us, that they actually got some big cables connected into a massive European grid. And Iceland's the other one, which is the size of my hometown, Palmerston North, sitting on the side of a volcano, so I don't know how sustainable they are, but at the end of the day, it's kind of not a big enough country to really compare with. So being an island nation of some 4.6 the other day million people and having 80% renewability is phenomenal. Geothermal is the number 2 fuel now in the country. It's probably for electricity generation. It's little known. They sit behind forests. They're out of the way. They have a very low footprint. They don't, like wind turbines, sort of sit on a ridge and wave at you. But that is the number 2 fuel in this electricity system, and that has displaced baseload thermal generation, and that's one of the reasons why you saw, along with some good wind generation there from Meridian, hello Guy, that has displaced to the point where Genesis has announced last week that it's shutting down Huntly in 3.5 years' time, and that is the end of coal-fired generation in New Zealand. So remarkable position for marketing the country. Innovation's been around for a long time in the sector, though the customer centricity is really starting to take a lift. We're the best at rolling out smart meters in the world. 60% of smart meters is rolled out. The UK and the Aussie experience has been very difficult. Without a smart meter, you can't have a modern digital customer relationship, and that's a great foundation. In 1888, we had the first street lighting in the Southern Hemisphere in Reefton. Our HVDC link, which leaves not far from here and goes across the strait, was world leading. And it also goes back to when a Californian and a Glaswegian surveyed the country for hydro resources over 100 years ago. And we've had plenty of that. They described it as white diamonds, being the water, because the black diamonds were the coal which built up UK and in America. So Mighty River Power, we have, as I mentioned, the Waikato Hydro Scheme, geothermal power stations, some of those involved in joint ventures with Te Hara North No. 2 Trust on the Rotokawa field, Te Arapaki Trust on the Mokai field, and they're all pretty much in the Taupo volcanic zone. We're shutting our gas-fired power station at the end of the year, which has kind of like 747 engines actually tucked under the wing, which Chris's team has been looking after us, his engineering services team just down the road there at Auckland Airport, which has been very helpful. We're shutting that at the end of the year and we'll be 100% renewable from that point. The geothermal expansion has been the key feature of Mighty River Power's sort of recent history, building power stations in 2008, 2010 and 2013. Each year they now displace 2.8 million tonnes of carbon dioxide relative to the coal that would have been burnt in their place. A remarkable emissions reduction, which is fairly unwell understood, to be honest. Some of those geothermal as I said, with geothermal joint venture partners, they are our test. It's about kaitiakitanga, which is custodianship, katahitanga, which is in partnership or togetherness, and they have their own beneficiaries of those trusts, and they have huge obligations to them. In the Te Hara North No. 2 Trust position, 6,000 beneficiaries, and that means that the wealth that is created from that resource goes to health programs, education programs. It enabled them to go down to Christchurch after the earthquakes and help some of their whānau down there who are also affiliated with the trust, because the 6,000 beneficiaries are spread throughout New Zealand and indeed some overseas as well. Apprenticeships, etc., etc. It keeps on going. And of course the wealth that's generated from that also goes to our 100,000 shareholders, which is the largest shareholding register in the country. Renewable energy typically lives in the provinces. You have to shift the power station to the fuel because you can't shift the fuel to the power stations, but hard to shift the Waikato River to, say, Auckland. So in that game, when you have renewable energy, you also have provincial employment. You know, six-figure salaries when you're living in the provinces with highly specialised jobs, and they, again, stay for a long time, whether you're repowering wind turbines in the Manawatu or geothermal turbines up in Rotorua. It's a long game, long sponsorships. We also have partnerships with Rowing New Zealand, 16 years, Starship, Waikato Catchment Ecological Enhancement Trusts, formal partnerships with Tūwharetoa, Ngāti Tahu, Ngāti Whawa, Raukawa, Waikato Tainui, etc. And Waikato River Trails, which is part of the cycle trail now as well. So we have very, very long games, about a century almost behind us and another century to go. So that's Mighty River Power's context. The largest opportunity, though, is, I think, in transport electrification in this country. The difference between 80% renewable electricity and 40% renewable energy, as announced yesterday, a lot of that is transport fuels, and another part of it is burping cows. And I know they're doing a lot of science on the latter, but the technology is rapidly evolving on the former in terms of transport, though we can't quite have electric planes, even though we'll give that a go, Christopher, at some point. It's not just about transport, though. This impacts health, it impacts tourism, it impacts export propositions, it impacts town planning when you actually look at what electrification of transport can do. We already have enough renewable electricity consented, so wind farms and geothermal power stations, to power every car in the country if we wanted. 2.8 million cars in the country. It's already there. There's no country in the world that has that renewable electricity proposition available to it. And that is a remarkable position. And so this is not just charging 20,000 cars or 30,000 cars. This is the whole lot. What does that mean? 4 billion on fuel imports. Not necessary. Balance of payments, regional employment, health outcomes in cities and smog, etc., etc. Not to mention the customer benefit of electricity being 30 cents a litre equivalent. So when you're driving on it, you'll hardly notice the cost. And lastly, I know it's a bit of an old-fashioned concept, electricity will be delivered to your home. We'll deliver it to your door. You don't have to go anywhere to get it. Sorry, Mike, but I'm sure we can go and get some at Mike's power station. He's got an electricity charge point just down here, I think, too. So I already own 2 of them. The driveway's full for me and my wife. There's only 750 in New Zealand. About March last year, I think it was under 200. So it's growing, but not fast enough. What's needed is fleets and leadership from people who own those fleets, right? And let's turn the business case around. I want you to write, if you're in charge of fleet procurement or one of your people is, and they might drive a lovely big V8, and that's a lovely sounding car, and I'd love to own one, but turn the case around and say, start off with you've got an electric car. Now justify why you're going to buy a non-electric car. Do you think the atmosphere needs another 2 tonnes per car per year stuck into it? Do you think that you'd rather spend $2.10 a litre or 30 cents a litre on powering that car? Do you think that we need the health benefits of driving with no tailpipe emissions, or do we think we could do with just electric emissions and renewable electricity powering that? And do you think that the country should be spending that money on its own electricity or importing the fossil fuels? You know, and we know what losing balance of payments looks like because we've just seen what's happened to the Fonterra payout. So turn that case around, but if you still want to buy one, argue that point in front of a bunch of primary school children who are going to inherit the planet in the future. And if you can successfully sell it to them, then you're a better negotiator than I am. It's got to be real. When we're standing on the moon looking at the planet, marketing isn't going to solve this. It's got to be a real, scalable case for solving New Zealand's transport emissions. As Obama said last week when he announced his clean energy plan, rightly pointed at electricity generation in America because so much of it's from coal. He said we're the first generation to feel the effects of climate change, and we're the last that can do something about it. So let's do something about it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fraser. Some great messages there about very, very long-term thinking, involvement of Maori and so on in the business. Some fantastic case studies there.